Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us. You ready to explore how cultures shape our world? We're going to be looking at everything from ancient traditions to modern films. And buckle up because we've got some amazing insights coming from all over the globe. We're talking indigenous Australia, the heart of Nollywood, even a glimpse into Soviet-era filmmaking.
Really captivating how we've got stories of survival, adaptation, and that constant tension between preserving traditions and embracing change.
Okay, so first off, indigenous Australia. They have a cultural history that goes back over 60,000 years. Can you even imagine living alongside giant wombats, passing down stories for millennia?
It's wild, right? And these stories, told over and over for generations, they're now being backed up by actual scientific discoveries. It's not just myth, they're echoes of a really ancient way of life.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about how much knowledge has been preserved, just through these oral traditions, but it makes you think how much has been lost, especially with the challenges they face, like the stolen generations and the forced assimilation policies.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about erasing culture, it was about severing that deep connection Indigenous Australians have with their country. And that's a concept that goes way beyond land ownership. Think of it as like a profound spiritual bond, a responsibility to care for the land and all living things.
So, their identity is woven into the fabric of the land itself.
Yeah,
That's really powerful. Makes you wonder if this ancient wisdom holds answers for us today, especially when it comes to things like climate change.
I think so. And, even today, there are people fighting to keep these traditions alive, not just in Australia, all over the world.
Right, like Albert Bender in Tennessee. He's a Cherokee advocate trying to raise awareness of the ancient Native American presence
Right?
right in Nashville.
Yeah, his work really highlights this global struggle. He's advocating for the preservation of these sacred sites,
hmm
which are constantly being threatened by development.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that cultural heritage, it isn't just about dusty artifacts. It's about living history woven into the land we walk on.
Okay, so we've got these ancient cultures fighting for survival. Let's jump to a cultural powerhouse that's absolutely booming. Nollywood. Now, for those who don't know, that's the Nigerian film industry, and it is making waves.
What's so interesting about Nollywood is how it just exploded. From these very humble beginnings, hyper-local stories, straight to video releases. And now it's this global phenomenon. It's challenging Hollywood in some way.
Wait, hold up, challenging Hollywood. Tell me more.
Think about it. Nollywood is the second largest employer in Nigeria, right behind agriculture. So its impact goes way beyond entertainment. It's a major economic force, providing jobs, shaping narratives, showcasing a side of Africa the world rarely sees.
That's incredible. It's like a cultural revolution happening right before our eyes.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, how did they pull this off? How did Nollywood, with limited resources, manage to capture the attention of a global audience?
Probably because their films resonate with so many people, telling these stories about family, love, hardship, triumph, themes that are just universal.
Right. Nollywood films aren't trying to be Hollywood. They're raw, authentic, and full of life. They offer a unique perspective. That's what makes them so compelling.
Okay, so we've seen how a culture can rise and thrive. But what about the challenges of navigating censorship? You know, those forces that try to control what stories are being told?
Yeah, this is where things get tricky. China's booming film market is a perfect example. It's this massive opportunity for filmmakers. But it comes with strings attached.
You mean like the whole Top Gun jacket thing, where they had to remove the Taiwanese flag patch for the Chinese release?
Exactly. That's just the tip of the iceberg. China has a whole set of regulations that influence what gets shown on screen. Some themes are strictly off limits, others are actively promoted. It's a complex landscape that filmmakers have to navigate very carefully if they want access to that massive audience.
So it's like this balancing act, trying to tell your story, but also trying to appease this powerful market.
And this tension isn't unique to the modern era either. Let's look back at Alexander Pushko, a Soviet filmmaker who managed to create these classic fairy tales, despite working under a pretty restrictive regime.
Well, wait, creating fairy tales under a regime known for censorship, that's a story in itself. I'm all ears.
Pushko's films are visually stunning. They're full of imagination. But they also subtly challenged the norms of the time. Like, he found a way to slip these subversive messages past the censors, all while entertaining audiences with these fantastical stories.
That's brilliant. It shows how even in the face of censorship, creativity can find a way to shine through. Makes you wonder, what were his strategies? How did he manage to navigate that delicate balance?
That's what we're going to unpack.
Yeah.
Right after.
All right, listeners, before we dive into those fascinating strategies, take a moment to think about this. What stories from your own culture resonate most deeply with you? And how do you think those stories are shaped by the world around us? We'll be back in a flash to continue our deep dive. Welcome back, deep divers. Before the break, we were totally captivated by Alexander Tushko, the Soviet filmmaker who wove magic and subversion into his fairy tales, all while navigating strict censorship. How did he do it?
Well, Kushko was really a master of symbolism and allegory. He used this fantastical imagery to explore themes of freedom and individuality, the power of the human spirit, things that would have resonated with audiences yearning for something beyond,
Yeah.
beyond the confines of Soviet ideology.
So it's like he was speaking truth to power, but using the language of fantasy. That's so
Yeah.
clever, and it makes you realize that censorship can sometimes backfire. Like, it can actually inspire artists to be more creative in finding ways to get their messages across.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that art can be such a powerful tool for resistance. Tuchko's story got me thinking about how we can play a role in preserving cultural heritage. As individuals.
You mean like beyond just watching Nollywood films or visiting museums?
Exactly. What if we actively seek out stories from cultures that are different from our own? Like learn new languages, attend cultural events, even support organizations like UNESCO, those dedicated to protecting global heritage. Every action, no matter how small, can really contribute to a larger movement.
That's a great point. It's like we each have a responsibility to be these curators of culture, to expand our understanding and keep these traditions alive for future generations. Speaking of traditions, let's circle back to indigenous Australia for a second.
Hmm.
Their concept of country is so intriguing.
Yeah, remember, it's more than just land ownership. It's this profound spiritual connection, a sense of responsibility for the well-being of the land and all its creatures. It's a perspective that I think could really benefit us today, especially as we're grappling with issues like climate change and environmental destruction.
Definitely. Imagine if we all viewed the land with that same level of respect and responsibility.
Yeah.
It would be transformative.
This way of thinking has been passed down for tens of thousands of years. But it makes you wonder, how do we learn from indigenous cultures without appropriating or exploiting their traditions? How do we find that delicate balance?
Yeah, that is a crucial question. It's about approaching these cultures with humility, a willingness to listen and learn. It's not about taking their ideas and profiting from them, but really understanding their worldview and seeing how it can inform our own actions.
Right. It's about building genuine relationships.
Yeah.
And working together to create a more sustainable future. Now let's shift gears for a moment. We've talked about the power of storytelling, but what about music? It can transcend borders and connect us in ways that words sometimes can't.
Oh, I love this. Music is definitely a universal language. It's funny you mentioned that. Did you know that John Field, an Irishman, he's actually considered the father of the nocturne, a musical form later made famous by Chopin, shows how interconnected we all are, how cultures influence each other in unexpected ways.
Amazing, isn't it? His story is a great example of cultural exchange. The surprising journeys that these artistic forms can take reminds us that cultural heritage isn't static. It's constantly evolving and being reinterpreted. This leads to something else that's been on my mind, the rise of streaming services. They've given us access to this incredible content from all over the world, like Nollywood films, which we were just talking about.
Yeah, streaming has been a game changer for sure. Are there any downsides to this, though?
Well, while it is amazing to have so much at our fingertips, there's a risk of cultural homogenization if we're not careful. The algorithms might favor mainstream content and potentially overshadow the voices of smaller cultures.
That's a good point. So how do we as viewers ensure that we're not just passively consuming what's fed to us, but actively seeking out diverse content?
It's about being conscious consumers of culture. We need to be curious, explore beyond our comfort zones, and make an effort to discover films, music, art from cultures we might not be familiar with. Don't just let the algorithm decide for you.
So true. We need to be more proactive in shaping our own cultural experiences, like being an explorer, constantly seeking out new horizons.
Exactly. It's about embracing that sense of adventure, realizing every culture has something unique and valuable to offer. Now, speaking of cultural preservation, let's take a quick detour to Moscow. Have you heard of VDNH, this vast exhibition complex? It almost fell victim to commercialization in the 1990s.
I haven't, but it sounds fascinating.
Well, VDNH showcases Soviet-era architecture, science, technology, and for a while it was threatened by developers who wanted to turn it into a shopping mall. Thankfully, public outcry and a renewed appreciation for its cultural significance led to its revival.
Wow, that's incredible. So it's a testament to the power of collective action and the growing awareness of the importance of preserving these cultural landmarks.
Absolutely. It shows that even in the face of economic pressures, People are recognizing that these spaces hold invaluable cultural and historical significance. Makes you think about the stories we hear about the destruction of ancient sites. Whether it's due to war, neglect, even climate change, it's a real loss for humanity.
It's heartbreaking to think about all the knowledge and history lost when these places are destroyed. Like losing pieces of ourselves, pieces of our shared human story.
It makes you wonder, in a world where content is so readily available, information flows so freely, are we doing enough to ensure that the stories of smaller, less commercially viable cultures
Hmm.
are being heard?
That's a profound question. It seems like this constant tension between preserving these fragile cultures and the relentless march of globalization. How do we find that balance?
That's something we'll explore further. But in the meantime, I'd love for you to consider this. What are some of the hidden cultural gems in your own community? What stories are waiting to be discovered? And how can you play a role in preserving them?
So we're back, and I think we're ready to sort of wrap up our deep dive into cultural heritage. Before the break, we were talking about those challenges of preserving these smaller cultures in a globalized world. It's definitely a topic that's close to home.
Yeah, you're right. It is personal. And
Yeah.
it's easy to feel overwhelmed, like how can we possibly safeguard every cultural treasure? But I think it's important to remember that change often starts at the grassroots level.
Yeah, think about Albert Bender, who we talked about earlier. He's not waiting for some big institution to swoop in and save the day. He's taking action, raising awareness, and fighting to protect those Native American sites in his own community. It's pretty inspiring.
It really is. It shows that we don't need to be experts. We don't need tons of resources to make a difference. Sometimes just sharing a story, supporting a local artist, or learning about a different culture, that can be incredibly impactful.
It's about being active participants in our own cultural landscapes, not just passive observers. But let's talk about technology's role in all of this. It's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. On one hand, platforms like Netflix have been instrumental in bringing Nollywood to a global audience, which is fantastic. But on the other hand, these algorithms can also create these echo chambers. They reinforce our own existing biases, and they limit our exposure to different perspectives.
So we need to be more mindful of our own digital diets, I guess. More intentional about seeking out content that challenges us, broadens our horizons, exposes us to different ways of seeing the world.
Exactly. Think of it like this. You wouldn't want to eat the same thing for every meal, right? You need a variety of nutrients to thrive. Well, the same goes for our cultural intake. We need a diverse mix of stories, perspectives, and experiences to really nourish our minds and souls.
I love that analogy. It's about being curious, seeking out the unfamiliar, realizing there's just so much beauty and wisdom to be found in cultures that are different from our own.
And remember, this isn't just about entertainment or passive consumption. It's about building empathy, fostering understanding, and recognizing that shared humanity. It's about breaking down barriers, realizing that despite our differences, we're all connected.
Like we're all threads in the same tapestry, each adding our own unique color and texture to the overall design.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it makes you realize that preserving cultural heritage isn't just about the past. It's about shaping the present and the future. It's about making sure those threads continue to be woven generation after generation.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you'd like to leave our listener with today?
I think the most important thing is to remember that cultural heritage is a living, breathing thing. It's not static, it's not confined to museums, it's all around us. And the stories we tell, the music we make, the food we eat, the way we interact with each other, the values we hold dear.
It's the essence of who we are, both individually and collectively. And it's something worth cherishing, celebrating, and fighting for.
Absolutely. And it's a responsibility we all share. So go out there, be curious, explore, connect. Let's weave a future where all cultures can thrive.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. Until next time, keep diving deep.